Elon's a smart guy, but he's from where?
He's from America. He's not from
South Africa, then America. So is he an expert on China? He probably got pretty smart and studied it a lot, but there's a whole lot he doesn't know about doing business in that country. So that's a risk, just not knowing. He doesn't know what the future lies. So, maybe he builds the plant and China says, this is our plant, get out of here, which happened in Venezuela and other countries. So there's some risks there as well. What did China do to help entice Elon to come in there? We talked about some of it. They dropped their requirements to have a partner. Did they mention other things?
They offered him a green card.
Come in, you can, and that's a great observation. I even go, gosh, I never thought of that. I've worked with people that are expats. I guess when we worked overseas, everybody I knew, they weren't given Egyptian citizen privileges. We had work visas, but green card is a little more advanced than a work visa. So that was something they did. But yeah, they tried to remove some barriers. They tried to offer some incentives. I think they actually gave some tax incentives to the buyer. So he comes in, he's going to not have to pay taxes on certain things. He's going to get some exemptions from like import tariffs for stuff he might need to bring in. But people who buy the car are going to get a tax break. So it has supply and demand. It encourages the growth. So good. Any other thoughts or comments about that? In a nutshell, foreign direct investment. This one, literally the definition of greenfield. What does greenfield mean?
Building from scratch.
What's that?
Building from scratch.
Building from scratch, or taking a green, because I remember when I studied this in my MBA program, my Egyptian teachers, I'm like, what? What the heck are you talking about? Green? Yeah, a grassy field. I says, what's that got to do with strategy? No, it's just the visualization of they go in and take a plot of land and plow it up and build a factory. That's literally what Elon did, right? There was mud at the time of the video. So anyhow, let's go through some of the more technical stuff, some of the definitions. But foreign direct investment, just simply a firm investing directly in facilities, assets we'll call it, to produce products or services in a foreign country. So greenfield, you build it from scratch. Nothing exists. Everything that you're going to need and create and use is going to be built by the company coming in from ground up. Brownfield, they don't talk about this much, I don't think they mention it in the book. You just buy somebody else's used stuff. I have another video I'll show you in a couple of days about Starbucks, and they went into Italy and they did brownfield. They went in and bought an old post office in Milan. And okay, it's tough to build fresh architecture in Italy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of beautiful buildings, and everything you build is going to not look as beautiful. So if you can buy an existing beautiful building, you're in good shape. However, you don't have to necessarily buy or build from scratch. You can do mergers or acquisitions. Acquisitions, you buy another company. Mergers is you come together with another company. It's not considered a foreign direct investment unless you own 10% or more of that acquisition. If you buy less than 10%, they're considered, from a stock investment perspective, you don't have much control, right? Anybody that owns 10% or more of a company starts to get a lot of sway in the management of it from a voting perspective. So for the purposes of, is it a foreign direct investment? If you have a little bit, at least 10% control of the company. Once you undertake this, then you can create a subsidiary. So if Tesla creates 100% ownership in China, they now have Tesla's China subsidiary. And it's 100%. It's actually called what kind of subsidiary? I kind of gave you the definition, but it took a guess.
Government?
What's
No.
that?
I said government. Government? Government?
No. They're buying it. Tesla owns it.
Sorry.
Good. There is nothing wrong with that guess. If you own something completely, it is called a blank subsidiary.
Wholly owned.
You hear this all the time. Say it real loud.
Wholly owned.
It's a wholly owned subsidiary, right? So in order to be a wholly owned subsidiary, or in order to even be a subsidiary, it has to, you own after more than 50% of it, right? So 100% wholly owned subsidiary. If you own a majority partnership or ownership in it, and these are incorporated businesses, then it's considered a subsidiary, but it's not wholly owned. If it's less than 50%, but greater than 10%, it's called an associate. So it's just the level, you know that in the name, it's just the level of ownership in that investment. However, they use another term if it's a partnership or joint venture, if it's not creating a corporation. So, if you just partner with another entity in town, you have a partnership agreement or a joint venture agreement, it's not a corporation, it's then just called a joint venture or partnership. And then finally, any business that has business outside of their home country is called a multinational, because you have physical locations in, exporters are not multinational. People that produce and offer in multiple countries, multinational. So how do we measure the activity? How do we measure foreign direct investment activity? So there's flow, meaning how much money is going in and out of countries, and that's generally measured on an annual period. Outflows are money coming from, so we'll use the example of America. America has money going out to a lot of different countries. That's the outflow from America, the US. So China has inflow coming from Elon Musk's company, so they have inflow. Stock of FDI, that's the aggregate or accumulated value of the inflows and outflows. So when you're just trying to think about it, well, how do we know what level of activity there is? You go by the annual period outflows plus the aggregate amount, which is stocks. So right now the trend over the last 30 years has been people are doing more foreign direct investment than has been actually happening with trade and the total balance of trade. The dollar value of foreign direct investment is like more than all import, export, and the total production in the worldwide market. Why do you do it? Obviously to avoid trade barriers. Other things, what drives it? A lot of political issues, and in terms of governments freeing up and willingness to let you do it. So just to give you a sense of the flow and the direction, the US has been one of the largest recipients of it. So obviously, why would people want to come in and put money from all these other countries come into our country to do business? Just give me the best 5 reasons.
Free, open market.
Free and open, we invite it.
It's an advanced developed country.
So they can find a good market, maybe they got better products than their market can buy, or they have surplus capacity, they want to come in here and take all what they've developed and put it to work in our country. Anything else? I need 3 more. We're stable, can kind of trust us. So we're inviting, but you're probably going to find some stability. If something happens, you're going to have the ability to deal with it. A friend of mine, Motman Natia, my good buddy from my MBA program, he told me that his family was still waiting for the day in court over some issues with a building they bought, and it had been almost 20 years. So they own a building, it's locked up, they can't do anything with it because they haven't gotten to court yet to settle this disagreement they have over the ownership. That would kill you, 20 years of tied up capital that you can't do anything with. Here we have a large wealthy market. People have money to buy stuff. So that's the reason you come here. So what's going on that's different? The video shows that China's really starting to open up, and so a lot of money's starting to flow into China. So this is just kind of a graph from the book. So this is sort of the beginning of the measure, but you can see developed nations are blue, developing nations, transitioning economies, smaller portion, but it's largely, the majority is in developed nations. But what do you see happening as we get up here? Right around this time period. Money's starting to head to developing instead of developed. Because maybe some saturation, maybe these are changing in such a manner that you now want to get your foot in the door. So you can just see this kind of a change where people are starting to go in. Also, it might be the issue of what's called offshoring, where you set up foreign development or foreign direct investment into places where you manufacture stuff that you want for your own products, but you manufacture them yourself offshore and you bring them back into the US. But just to give you sort of a trend, and then lots of money being spent. $20 trillion, or $2 trillion, I mean. So this is the cumulative outflows for about a 20-year period. Clearly, the United States is leading, and this is funny, the book has a new version that's come out, it's effective as of 2025. This chart is doubled. So this goes up to 2020, in the last 4 years, no, the chart in the book is 3 years after this. All of these numbers have doubled. So it's just accelerated. So we're at like $9 trillion in the outflows. Okay. Talked a little bit about we've covered this a bit, but let's look at greenfield. Any investment that sets a new operation, builds from scratch, acquire or merge, quicker to execute. So one of the reasons you might decide not to do a greenfield or even a brownfield, but maybe it's just better to go into a country and purchase or merge, acquire or merge with somebody, is to avoid some unexpected situations. First of all, time. How much time it takes to get permits, to get set up and to build, you can hit the ground running. How about if you don't have the knowledge in the market, right? Or you don't have access to certain facilities or certain resources. By going in with another company that's already established, you may be able to acquire those strategic assets. And the last one is the idea of if you take over another company, and this is literally why businesses in the United States take over other businesses in the United States. You may be able to take that business, see where you can improve it through your own productivity, through your own management, through your own ideas, and you might be able to take that business and make it a much stronger business, so that, you know, that is an opportunity where you don't have near the risk, but you have the ability to facilitate, you know, proper utilization of your capital. This is one of the crazy things. Maybe, DJ, this is one of the reasons Elon Musk is wanting access to Social Security data. He's going into these organizations and saying, where are we? Let's start cutting people. I'm not making this up. This is literally what hedge fund investors are saying. This process is you go in, take over a company, cut as much waste as you can, always overshoot it, figure out what you really need, then bring back only the best of what you really need. It's just a strategy for acquiring a business that you go, that's a great business. It's just not run properly. So let's go in and acquire it, and let's do these 3 or 4 different things, and we'll take the market. Warren Buffett's one of the, anybody ever heard of Warren Buffett? He takes that approach in a lot of his companies. He looks at companies and goes, these are great companies. Sometimes it's all about these are great managers of great companies, or these are great companies, and with these little twists, these will be phenomenal companies. And he's done pretty well. All right. So why, again, I'm kind of repeating this because the book repeats it over and over and I'm trying to follow up. But really, why do we do foreign direct investment? Because the other choices are licensing and exporting. And exporting, you produce goods at home, you move them across the overseas, I guess. It's not really overseas when you go to Canada or Mexico, but it could be. You can do licensing, and part of the deal is foreign direct investment is expensive and it's risky. So, you know, but it is an alternative to these other two. What are the downsides of the other two? Limitation of exporting. It costs money to bring stuff from point A to point B. And if you can cut that part of the cost out of the product development, you might have a benefit. How about trade barriers? Again, exports, governments can control them, so they might act or put on certain types of transfers. Trade barriers or tariffs that are going to cost you and raise the price, artificially raise the price. So if you can avoid that, that's another attractive way to go into foreign direct investment. License is a little bit more different. The book calls this internalization theory. And it really talks about the things about giving somebody permission to do something that you do, and some of the challenges where that may or may not be available or even a good idea. The first one, you give away your technology. The biggest risk when you do a license is you have to turn over something really proprietary. My understanding is Coca-Cola owns all Coke production. Because in a vault in Fort Knox, buried 1 million feet underground, is the recipe for Coke. And nobody gets that. So they produce it all. All right, that might be a slight exaggeration, but the idea is they don't want people to know that recipe or some technology that makes them have a competitive advantage. The other part of licensing is you have lack of control. You're trusting other people to execute your plan. A good example is, anybody been to a restaurant franchise where you go to restaurant franchise, and then you go one and like, what the heck, this place is a pit.
Whataburger outside of Texas.
Oh, really?
Is so bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Inedible.
You said where?
Outside of
Whataburger
Texas.
outside of
I went
Texas.
to a Whataburger.
They just don't have it in their
up in
souls.
Louisiana, Mississippi.
Really? I lived in Mississippi for a while. I haven't been to too many good fast food restaurants. I mean, I shouldn't be that way, but as a business when I first moved back from Egypt, I moved to Oxford, Mississippi. Oxford is a cool place. I love a lot of it. I pull up to the drive-thru and I'm like, after 3 minutes, I want to go and go, everybody gather around. Let's have a discussion. You're all going to be unemployed if you don't pick up your service. If you don't clean the place, if you don't look me in the eye, I'm like, just shut up, Brian. Just don't come back here. But that's the thing. You don't have that control, and it could ruin your business. You could say, look, it's not trustworthy. One of the things about McDonald's. Anybody ever read the unofficial biography of Ray Kroc? They kind of made a bit of a movie out of it with Michael Keaton. Fascinating book, and it talks about what makes McDonald's McDonald's. I mean, right down to the measuring the humidity in a potato and adjusting it for, I think, sea level and altitude, and so that pretty much when you go to a McDonald's, it's pretty consistent. And if you think of how hard that is, you travel across the United States, a McDonald's is a McDonald's is a McDonald's pretty much. When you go to Egypt, you go, wow, this tastes like McDonald's. Like, in where I left from St. Cloud, Minnesota. The only downside is they couldn't get the right onions, so they used red onions, which I love, my wife hated. But it was all about a McDonald's, and this is from Ray Kroc's perspective. A McDonald's should be a McDonald's same taste everywhere you ever go to it. And you lose that with licensing. You could lose that if you don't control it properly. And then the last one is the concept of your competitive advantage is something that's internal to your organization, like management skill, the culture of your organization, the ability to do certain things. That's more not a thing you can give a script to or a recipe to. It's the collection of the culture, the people that are currently doing it. You almost can't license that. You could possibly bring people over and try to encourage that, but it's unlikely if that is your strength. That culture, it's pretty hard to give that script to somebody and say, here, replicate this. So that's limits, and again, internalization theory and why licensing is not the best choice. So what are the advantages of foreign direct investment? You reduce cost, you avoid trade barriers. If you want to avoid licensing, you want to maintain control, and also you don't have these characteristics that help you execute your products or services. They're not amenable to a licensing arrangement. So what's changed? Why are people doing a little bit more, quite a bit more actually in foreign direct investment? We talk about the decline in radical ideology. Do you recall what that meant, radical ideology? That's kind of a radical way to identify that particular ideology, but people kind of thought when a foreign business comes in here, it's just going to rape and pillage and take advantage of all of our stuff and ruin our country and leave. And we don't want that. And that's shifted to go, wow, if this organization comes in and invests resources, it might create better products, it might create more competition, our prices might go down, we might have more jobs. It's a shift from, foreign business coming in bad to maybe not so bad. And again, that flip side of that is people have opened up to, hey, why don't we be a little more open? Let's go back to some of these early trade theories where that say it's probably benefits us by allowing and stimulating more trade. And obviously some places that have huge markets, India and China, I believe add them together, what's that, half the world's population, maybe a little more. I mean, those are big markets. Some countries haven't quite adopted that belief. The example the book gives is Venezuela, which has kind of regressed and taken over and nationalized businesses. In Bolivia, I'm not all that familiar with what's going on in Bolivia, but it apparently is not as open. So what are some of the benefits? So host country. A host country is the foreign country. So if I'm in the home country is where the headquarters of the main company is, right? So just, you're like, okay, which is which? Home country headquarters for the organization. Host country, the place you're doing business that's not your home country. So the host country benefits, what do they get? They get a lot of things. They get access to materials, they might get better products, they can get money, investments, they can get technology, they can learn how to do things themselves and improve all of their industries, bring more jobs, obviously. It has an effect on competition, and the concept is the more competition, the better the products, the cheaper they are. So that's kind of a standard thing. In a free market capitalist system, competition reduces prices and increases quality. So if you allow them to come into countries, then you can do that. Now, the only thing is that tends to work more with greenfield investments than it does with acquisitions. Why would that be? Why would a greenfield add to the competition where maybe a acquisition might not?
It's completely new practices.
New practices?
It's adding a business instead of taking over a new one.
Yeah. You create a whole new entity as opposed to repurpose a regular one that exists. So maybe the regular one that exists that actually suffers a little setback. Doge goes in there and says, tell you what, let's cut the employment down to half. Okay, that's not such a beneficial thing initially. But if you have an acquisition, you're not adding more competition, you're just changing one competitor. And so, but they're not saying it's not good, they're just saying it's hard to determine whether that's good or not. If you have a struggling business that has great assets and a company comes in and purchases them and flips that around and makes them a competitive business, then boom, this business is going to start to challenge the existing businesses. And by doing so, again, higher competition equals better products at lower prices. Yeah, and then they use the example of the benefits are especially important when it's a business that can't be exported or it has to be created inside the company. That is the benefit. If you can't possibly operate from outside, the book uses telecommunication as an example. Unless you have somebody come in and start a new telecommunication competitor, you're not going to move beyond maybe a monopoly of telecommunications. So what are the downsides for the host country? Well, one is they might have a big, strong competitor that actually blows away the competition. They have more access to more capital, they have access to maybe more resources. And I actually already covered the last one with acquisitions. How about home company benefits? What's the benefit for the headquarters country if a business goes and starts in another country? Well, one, it does generate revenue that they can pull back in and invest in the local economy, right? So they also might create a lot of export opportunities for suppliers that companies within the home country can then export to the host country where they're going to utilize the product. The other thing is they might actually go in and learn from these host countries how things can be done differently. I would argue Japan taught a lot of people how to do business back in the, I'm going to say early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. Japan just blew everybody away with a concept called just-in-time manufacturing. Anybody, have you covered that at all, just-in-time? Mm-hmm. Can you give me your best shot at how you would describe it?
It's just the most effective way to run a production facility.
It's effective because it's really efficient.
Yeah, it includes your suppliers and end users and that.
So up until that approach, how would we normally do something? And think of this in Texas. Think of this not so much in the cold, but in the heat. Let's say you're going to bring in a ton of different resources. They all need to be cool. They can't get hot. So you're going to have a massive plant. What are you going to do? You're going to build a huge warehouse and air condition it, and then you're going to ship all your stuff into that warehouse so you never run out. And you're going to have to wait. You're going to, order stuff as you need it, but for the most part, it'll always be parked there. And some of the products might be good. Some of them might not be quite perfectly fitting. You might have to get rid of some and reorder. Japan says, let's do it this way. We don't want warehouses. We're going to have suppliers. They will store the stuff. They will bring it to us right when we need it. We'll go over to them and we'll say, how are you building it? This is what it needs to look like. This is how tight it needs to fit into these mechanisms. So they just went along and said, okay, we cut all that warehousing cost, we cut the defect rate by working directly with employers, and so they got really integrated in the whole supply chain. And that would come in, literally, they bring in enough units for like 5 cars, and out the other, the other side of the building, 5 cars would roll out, they bring in 5 more. And that so tightened up production that we're like, wow, this is kind of a neat concept. You might have learned that. I think actually Gung Ho, anybody seen that Michael Keaton movie? He was sent over to learn how to do that. Hollywood is imitating art there. Offshore production, I mentioned what that is. It's basically the idea you build a production facility in another country to feed your home country's business. Same thing, you still are doing production, but a lot of times you have to be cautious that you get imported, duties and tariffs coming back in if you're not doing it under the right conditions. So how do the home country policies encourage it? Well, if you really want your industries to go out there, you help protect them through insurance. You loan them money at below market interest rates. You can also give taxation breaks, so you can say, a classic one is you avoid double tax. If you're bringing money back and you get a 20% tax coming out of Germany, our tax is 30%, you'll only pay an additional 10. As opposed to, you pay all of Germany's tax, you pay all of the US tax. But it's ways governments can try to facilitate encouraging that. How do you restrict it? Kind of do the opposite. You don't allow them to take money out of the country. When you take money out, you actually have to register it, and a good way to get busted is get on an airplane with like $11,000 in cash. But yeah, don't do that. If you do, don't declare it. No, you declare it. But you can limit how much money you can transfer out and how much currency you can take out. Also, they can manipulate the tax rules. They can take money that's being repatriated and charge double. And then finally, you can prohibit the actions in certain countries, issue sanctions. Like countries have really been, up until I think just before the Biden administration, were not allowed to do business with Iran. I mean, very, very limited business. And if you did business with them, if you're a US company, you were dinged pretty severely. If you're a foreign country, you were prevented and taxed and charged fines because they don't want certain activities to occur. And so that's how the government can actually manipulate or to control trade activity. So host countries, how do you encourage it? Just the opposite. Give people incentives, give them tax breaks, is the example from Tesla going into China. How do you restrict it? You heard a little bit, the example is you just have ownership requirements. So you can't wholly own an organization. You must have an in-country partner. When I worked I think I told this my first day, when I worked in Egypt, there was a travel agency that I used to use. I actually ended up working with them a little bit, but it was really run by an expat woman who couldn't run her own business. So she had, a partner who didn't really do anything, who was Egyptian. And it was all set up formally on paper, but this person completely owned and ran the company, and for requirement's sake had an individual who was listed as her partner. But the other part of this is you can have what are called performance requirements, and those are similar to ownership restraints. It's just that it might be other types of requirements, such as you must have a board, and they must have a percentage of the board of directors are people from within that country. Or you might have to, at some point in time, reach some level of productivity, or you lose part of the you use part of the benefits, the tax rates and breaks and such. So there's a lot of ways. You have to bring in your technology in order to establish the company. If you don't do that, then you're not able to come into the country. So this is kind of a neat little framework. I'm going to put this on the exam, give you like 5 examples, and you have to, I won't do that, but it's good to figure this out. So how high are transportation costs and tariffs? Let's say they're not very high. What's one of the best ways to do business? If you're going to try to take your products and services, put them in the international market, and the cost of transportation or the tariffs are very low in the country you're looking for, are you going to build a building in that country and make it? No. I mean, you're going to just take your scale of what you have and use that production and export it, because travel's not, or the transportation's not expensive and the tariffs aren't too high. What if they're high? Well, then you have to go, is the know-how, meaning all the technology and all the knowledge of how to operate, is it amenable to licensing? Can you give it somebody permission, write out the script and say, here, follow this? If it's yes, then first, okay, if it's no, you can't, then you gotta go to for direct, right? You have to go in and do the business yourself. If it's yes, then the next one is how important is it to have tight control over the output? If it's not that important, then you could go one step further. Can the know-how be licensed through a contract? And ultimately, if it can, you can license it. But at any point along the way, if it can't be, you can't license it, you can't control it, you can't protect the know-how or convey the know-how. All of those are justification why FDI would be the best choice. Does that make sense? Any thoughts, questions? So we have exactly 30 minutes for 3 presentations. What country do you want to hear about first? Italy?